I'm conscious I've been a bit all over the place before we got our notes, but are there any questions on this? I've tried to give you just a view of how we've evolved. I'll dig down a little bit further now. Any question? Anything you didn't understand or want to raise? Well, it's not a paid position. No, it's not a paid position. It's a volunteer position. Some of our chairmen get a day a week. The movement covers them. No, he stayed on as part of the national exec. He was pastoring a church, yeah, and so I got on very well with him. I didn't have any real difficulty. However, his approach to leadership at that particular time just didn't work. It just didn't work, and he got terribly hurt when Dudley stood against him, and that was unfortunate. But he overcame that after a period of time, and so we do honour him as somebody who did hold it together after Leo died, but just his style was one that just wasn't acceptable. And it was very difficult. Worked in the building industry, but not in the movement as such, particularly at that time. So, yeah. Any other question?
Was the chairman Russ Hooper?
Russ Hooper, that's it,
So
yeah.
He nearly 10 years in the game, so like he was there from
8 years.
77 to 1985.
That's right, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So, but it wasn't. The only time it was elected was in 1983. Once we brought the Constitution in, then we wanted Dudley to stand. We needed a change, and Dudley felt no. So Russ did get elected in 1983, the first time. So that's a correction. I thought Dudley was the first election, but that was the only time he was elected by the movement, as such, because there was no other candidate. And then of course Dudley stood. But yeah, so it was just circumstances, like that's why I don't blame Russell. He functioned well under Leo, but it was like here, the church, and because I was a witness to it, it was a terrible situation really, where the team fell apart and divided into factions because they were all loyal to Leo Harris. But after that, you say, well, who's going to be the leader? And they didn't have a proper mechanism, decision-making process of how to even make the decision. That's how lack of organisational framework it was. They had to work out what percentage of the eldership could actually, was it going to be 10 out of the 14 or 9 out of the 14 that had to agree? And it just became an impasse for about a year and a half. Not quite a year and a half, but... and so it became really difficult, and the factions. And so I know for myself, I was, to me, it was very obvious to a whole pile of us that Barry Chant was the logical candidate to become the lead pastor, and he would have had 80% of the support of the church. But there was a move by some people to block him from being in that role. So Barry, being gracious as he is, he prayed and reflected, and as he went overseas, he just felt, well, look, I will let go. And the Bible College, if he was the principal, the dean, it became Tabor College, so good came out of it. but then, when they selected David Rodway, who is Leo's son-in-law, and I know David, I talk with him, he's in Canada, he's an older man now, but he had the ambition to lead the church, but he didn't have the support of the people. Brilliant man, but didn't have the spiritual ministry and personality type to actually, and so they selected Ian Simpson, and he was one of my pastors. I loved him dearly, beautiful man, terrific pastor, counsellor. However, it was putting a square peg in a round hole. Ian, I could say it, I'm only a young guy leading in the Christian Family Centre, but he just didn't fire. and he ends up having a heart attack, a lot of pressure, but he also had the Harris family harassing him and putting pressure on him. It was a terrible time. So Ian didn't function too well, but at least he held the church together pretty reasonably. But then he let go of it, and so David became the leader, and the church just went, phew. And so it was really difficult. And so one of my most unpleasant tasks in being the state chairman at the time was when it collapsed, basically, and the elders and David, it just was unworkable. So I had to park myself here for a couple of weeks, actually, every day, every night, interviewing people. And I missed the national conference, Neil, back then, and it was just really difficult because the family basically tried to do a coup d'etat against the eldership team, and it was illegal. It was against the constitution. You just can't do it. So, but the elders were very gracious towards Pastor Harris, because it's Pastor Harris's family. And I remember talking to David, and they would have had him back as their leader, even though the church had gone downhill, if he apologised for some of the things that he did. So he basically got up on a Sunday and said, they're all sacked. I'm replacing them all. They knew nothing. Like, he didn't have the power to do it. The eldership have the power to sack the senior minister, not the other way around. It's like, I can be sacked tonight by my board. I can be sacked by the national executive. I wouldn't have it any other way. If you don't have, if you say you're a leader and no one's following you, you're just going for a walk on your own. Really, it's like there's got to be, you've got to have the confidence. So David, I remember I was home and I was appealing to him on the phone, and Kathy was listening, and I still remember, I'm thinking, he's been sacked. They're going to reinstate him if he apologises. And I'm thinking, I said to the elders, I don't think you should do that, but that's their decision. He wouldn't apologise. He felt he was doing the right thing, and in sacking him en masse. I'm thinking, because he's the God-called man, but he didn't follow the process, And anyway, so I'm the state chairman. Enjoy the confidence of the pastors. We've built a significant facility. Things are happening at Seaton, and he's given me a lecture on leadership. It was the most surreal thing. Like I'm a lot younger than him, but he's given me a lecture. Now, Bill, let me tell you about leadership. And I'm thinking, this is Nutsville. It's like you're getting the sack. They're asking you to change, repent, and apologise. You won't do it. You know nothing about spiritual leadership. And I just said nothing. But I just thought, this is deception, that you've deceived yourself. If you really believe that you've got it and they've all got it wrong, it was crazy. And he wouldn't listen to me or anyone else. So, but at the same time, you've got to love. And so when he left with Bill, Hans and I took him out for a meal and we blessed them. And she gave me the photo I have in my office, which is really great. And so I keep in touch with them. We're looking at actually fixing up Leo's memorial, the thing, because it's all washed away, and so I've been in contact with them. So you don't hold on to feelings, but it was just a really terrible time back then, and so the church went right down, and really, there weren't wise decisions made, and really the church here was going right down until Neil came in, and as the senior minister, letting go of a great concern at Port Life as he was leading, and really rescued the church. I really think it lifted after that, and then with the transition to Mike, it's now going gangbusters, eh? Yeah, he really mucked up financially. And it was dear Jeff Driscoll. I don't know if you remember Jeff Driscoll. Jeff was... who is that? Yeah. Reg Wilson. Yeah, you did go to Bible school with me. The face is familiar. That's why I thought, Yeah, no, it's really sad, Mike, that kind of stuff. But dear Jeff Driscoll blew the whistle and basically said, when he was looking after all the finance. Do you remember all that, Neil? All the finances, and it was just catastrophic. And so the church was in a really bad way. And so what you see today is excellent leadership. Neil, Mike, a board that's properly structured and functioned and growing, and the schools and all that stuff. But we could have lost everything. We could have lost it all. The mother church of our movement. So it's a delight to see it, what's taken place. But it was terrible, having been an eyewitness to it. And Hans Wortmann was another one that we several of us that were. So one of the things, a lesson for me was the factions to make the decision. I'm wanting Barry Chan to be the pastor, and there's some terrible stuff going on. I prayed and I said, God, I'm just going to go and speak to every elder, share what I feel is right, and then I'm going to shut up. I'm not going to say anything more. I don't want to be involved in politics. So I told them all, listen, guys, I said, I'm young, I'm only 23. I said, but can I just give you my honest opinion? I said, and now I'm not going to talk about this anymore. It's your decision. You have to give an account to Jesus for your decision. And and then I bowed out of it, and God called me to the Christian Family Centre, which is a little group back then. But it was, but I learnt the lesson to say, I don't want to get caught up in church politics, but you've got to speak your mind. You've got to be honest. Go to the right people, then leave it at that. And so it was just very difficult. It was chaotic. One of the issues was it was raised that they should perhaps ask the national executive of the CRC to be involved in helping them make the decision about the appointment. And they said, no, we didn't appoint them. They'd have no input in our church. So it was this independent thing of, not wanting to submit to the constituted leadership of the movement. And so thankfully that tide has turned, and so most of our churches are really responsible. And, for example, St. Agnes is turning around because you've been responsible in calling for help. Our Hope Church that had difficulties, we called for help. So being part of a denominational family is very helpful, to have people outside the church who are objective, can look in, and because once you're in a situation where it's difficult in an eldership, and that you can't be objective. You've got to have a neutral umpire out there, and that's why I believe in denominations, but good denominations, like we say, autonomous interdependence. And people have said to me, oh, you guys are just into central control and we don't want our church to be controlled by it. And I said, listen, I've never had an executive ever interfere in the Christian Family Centre. But I've said on many occasions, I'd welcome it. If I'm doing the wrong thing or heading in the wrong direction, I would welcome input and that. So this thing of, denominations are abominations and that, they just want to control the church, it's just not true. Not with the kind of structure that we have set up, the organisational framework, but we believe in accountability and making sure that people do the right thing, our ordained pastors and also our eldership teams. Any other question? I'll move on. Just to give you an example of, when I say organisational frameworks, there's two illustrations that I use. Back in the 1700s, you've all heard of John Wesley and George Whitefield, and amazing men. I love them. I still do. I've got all of John Wesley's journals. Amazing stuff. The modern Uniting Church wants to censor all that stuff because he had deliverances and baptisms in the Spirit and visions and dreams. But Wesley was nowhere near as good a preacher as George Whitefield. George Whitefield was a brilliant preacher, gifted man, charismatic. He was cross-eyed, like people looking this way, the other eyes looking that way, and he was the funniest looking guy. But but his voice and his pathos, hundreds of thousands of people came to faith in the UK and in the Americas. He led the Great Awakening just before the revolution. And we're talking about Jonathan Edwards, and if you know anything about the Great Awakening, it actually prepared America for the terrible colonial war. John Wesley was nowhere near as good a preacher, but by golly was he organised. All these new converts, he formed little connection groups, cell groups. And so Wesley was organised, planned. There are now 80 million Wesleyan church, 80 million people belonging to Methodist and Wesleyan churches across the world. And a lot of them are Pentecostal. There's no Whitfield churches. So you can be charismatic and anointed, but doesn't mean that you're going to actually produce and grow a movement that will carry it on. And I'm not saying a negative about Whitfield, just didn't do it. Same as with Billy Sunday. He preached to 100 million people in the early part of the 20th century. Powerful preacher. He was a baseball player. The Billy Graham of the early 20s. 1920, 15. And then there's this little girl called Amy Semple McPherson. Okay, she marries this guy named Semple. They become missionaries to China. They arrived there, I think, in Shanghai, and he dies of typhoid within months, and she's pregnant. And she's called to preach. An amazing story. She goes back to America, and she's got this compulsion to preach. And but, you know, she didn't have a husband, and she had this baby. So she married McPherson, who is I think he was an accountant. Anyway, the marriage didn't work. And he didn't want to be travelling around the country. Anyway, so she married a third time. And that was a disaster. Okay, so it was like, she wasn't an immoral person. There's a lot of, but she was a genius in organisation. Not just a gifted preacher and healer. She built the largest physical church in America called Angela's Temple, could seat nearly 6,000 people. There's now nearly 9 million people that belong to the Foursquare movement with, I think, 70,000 churches in about 150 nations. One little girl. But she knew how to organise, she knew how to build teams. Sunday was a more powerful preacher, but there's no movement. So what I'm saying is, organisation and structure is not a dirty word, and it needs to be, but it needs to be our servant and that. So that's why if Pastor Harris came back and visited the CRC, he'd go, "What have you guys done?" You know, because back then, organisation, administration was a dirty word, like, oh, you know, like control. You know, we've got to be free. And if he lived, I think he would have evolved. He was that intelligent. I think he would have evolved and understood there needs to be succession, needs to be proper order, but he never had the opportunity in that. So there's just a couple of examples of why it's important. Now, going back to my notes there, new established denominations face their biggest spiritual viability test when they transition to the third generation. Okay? This is 80 to 120 years. We've just entered that now. And so the CRC's evolution, I've mentioned about the book that I hope I will write and edit called Through My Eyes. It's another project. But they're the dates of our national leaders. And Russ Dudley, and Russell was a great man of God. I don't want to denigrate him in any way. It just he misfired and didn't function in that role, and the movement needed something different. And so each of these men have had an incredible input upon the whole movement, including Pastor Neil, Pastor Mike Cronin, Dudley Cooper, and Russ in his own way, even though it was a difficult period. But basically, we've only had 6 national leaders in the movement in 80 years. Now, my role, I'm finishing 24 years this October, and I don't think that's going to happen again. I think that's a bit unreal for someone to be in the role for that long. I think probably 12 years would be great for someone to really have input, I think. So I think my own role, and when I write up the thing, is I think I was needed for a particular period, just my own calling and gift mix to lead the movement in particular ways that were needed. So I've regarded myself as a younger Joshua. You notice that? Neil is a middle Joshua, and Mike is a middle Joshua. The older Joshuas have gone to be with the Lord. So this younger Joshua is finishing up too. So now we've got to move on to the next generation. What I've raised and been praying and reflecting and have spoken to our national exec, our national council in messages, is it's a dangerous era. Because when you look at the story of the judges, something went wrong. Moses transmitted to Joshua the vision, the values, the beliefs, the Ten Commandments, all that stuff. And Joshua was a magnificent leader, amazing leader. But then I think Joshua is realizing something is amiss with this next generation. The first generation all died in Sinai. So it's the next generation. And so that's why he writes to them at the end. He warns them. You've got to follow what Moses, the leader, and you've got to obey. So what do you think? Why did they degenerate into almost becoming pagans within the Judges period? Is an awful book when you read it. I mean, like, they're sinning badly. When they're suffering, they call on God. He raises a deliverer. And these deliverers are imperfect. But this goes on for, I think, 250 to 300 years. So my challenge was, what really went wrong with the transmission? And I don't have a definitive answer, except I think comfort. They now possess the land. And the buildings, the towns, the crops were already made for them. They just took them over. Okay, so they're wanderers before. Now they've got their own plot of land, they've got their own house, they've got their food source, they're secure. And I think when you've been around for a lot, it's a bit like I see the Christian Family Centre, our church. There's a whole stack of people that are really comfortable. It's a really nice church, nice building, it's good pastors, let's say they're good pastors. And they get fed well, led well, fed well. They're getting fat and lazy. So I'm getting some thermonuclear devices and putting them under the seats. I want to blast them into orbit again. That's why the 50th was important. And so the series that we're doing and teaching, we're really wanting to fire up. Starting the new church at Prospect with 100 of our people, that's put the wind up a lot of people. So 100 of our best people have gone to start a church with our blessing, and then at 10:30 you think, man, there's a lot of empty seats there. So you know what? We pray and we believe that God's going to fill them, and people are starting to come in. New people are getting saved. So putting a bomb under them I'm saying to them, and we're going to do 2 more churches. So I've already worked out where they're going to be. One's going to be east, and one's going to be between Glenelg and Brighton, probably Hove, around that area. So I said, I feel it, I smell it, I see it, I feel it. Who's going to be the pastor? I don't know. Who's going to go? I don't know. But I'm sowing that in them because I know they're fat and lazy, some of them. They're comfortable. And I've got to stir them up in prayer. They've got to pray. And I think that's what happened to that Judges generation. I think they just kind of like, oh yeah, we'll do the sacrifices. Yeah, we'll go to prayer. We'll read. I think they backslid. I think they just got lukewarm. And then they let the culture of the world come into the ship of the church. And it sunk them. So I think the CRC, we're a good movement. We've got some excellent churches. We've got some good structures in that. But I think the fire of revival and spiritual life has got to be the foundation. And that's why I'm thrilled about our World Missions vision to say, you know what, we want every church to be involved in World Missions. We want every pastor to be thinking about reproducing themselves to another pastor, every church to plant a church. So why say that? Because that, he says, okay, we need faith, we've got to believe. Otherwise, we want to be, this next generation, I don't want it to be the Judges generation, I want it to be the greatest generation. So really, So our role, like Neil, myself, Mike, all of us, we're wanting to impart to make sure the next bunch of leaders, because they didn't know Leo Harris, they didn't know Russ Hooper, some of them didn't even know Mike Cronin, some of them didn't even know Neil Milne. I've been 24 years now, they've only known me a lot, half the pastors that have been ordained, so I'm thinking, okay, I'm not going to be around, I better make sure that I transmit the vision and the values and the heart. That's why we've done this with 5 keys of authority. We want every pastor, every person to actually go through it and get fired up with the authority of Christ, the authority of the believer, the new creation message, principles of faith. So that's a challenge that I think we're facing now, and I think we'll come through it, but it's one that I'm more conscious of, because I know that there's a sunset clause on my leadership, and we have to make sure that the next generation, the leaders that are right, men and women who are in their 30s and 40s now, that they're properly trained, really, and not just trained in theology, but trained in the vision and heart of the movement and its direction. So here's some, some evolutionary changes. The first charter in 1972, this is looking at your notes, Leo Harris was smart enough, he took out any reference to the British Israel message out of the charter. Most of you don't even know what that is. When I came on the scene, they taught it in Bible college. And I'm doing historiography at university. That's my major, history. And I'm thinking, what is this BI stuff? And so I did all my research, Old Testament, New Testament. And the speaker, the teacher was hopeless. So I raised a question with him. And I said, if the 10 tribes, disappeared and they ended up as the Anglo-Saxon peoples, and none of the people who live in Judea, Palestine, were from the 10 tribes, how come it says in Scripture that Anna was from the tribe of Asa? She obviously knew that her heritage was in one of those tribes. So there were people that came back from Assyria and Babylonia, and they recognised their roots. A bit like I'm a Greek man. I call myself I'm an Aussie, but I'm a Greek Aussie. I can't deny my heritage. I speak the language. So she knew. Well, he went mad at me. He told me, that's an illegitimate question. Like, he really went nuts. He didn't answer me. So I went to Pastor Harris and said, it's Pastor Harris. I said, listen, please, this teacher is terrible. I said, he's really not good. And I said, do I have to believe this stuff to be part of the CRC? And he says, no, you don't, because it's not part of our declaration of faith. But so most of you have never even heard of the BI message. But in 1972 with the Charter, because he recognised Australia had become a multi-ethnic nation. When he started using the BI message was during the Second World War. There were no other races here. There were no Filipinos here. There were no Greeks. There were no Indians. Where are you from? You know, Pacific. They were just all Anglos. They just ate meat and potatoes. That's all they did. Boring, you know. And so God used the BI message to win thousands of people to Christ because the Japanese were ready to invade Australia. They'd already drawn the Brisbane line. And people were scared. They were uncertain. And so Leo would get up and preach, no, we're not going down because God has called Australia. We're part of the called people. And his wasn't a theology of race like BI. It wasn't like election of race. It was election of grace, and that the race has a responsibility to proclaim the grace of God. So he was very good. He was not a racist. But a lot of BI people are just flat out racist. And the guy that taught us in college was a racist and just was awful. And so, but Leo was smart enough, he adapted to realise, and I can't recall him speaking on the message in the 7 years that I knew him. So that's important because it shows that he would adapt and he would change and he would grow. I remember when he came across Yonggi Cho and Robert Schuller, two amazingly gifted men, and Leo was enthralled with them. And he went there and he learnt and he actually mastered their understanding of faith and possibility thinking with Schuller. And he was a learner. That's why I believe if he was in his mid-60s, early 70s, I think he would have evolved the CRC. But he was only 57 when he passed on, because he was so smart and intelligent and always learning. But so the Charter in 72 took out that the National Constitution. I've got here 1981-82 question mark. I've got to check out the documentation. I think it was 80 to 81. I could be wrong. The first direct elections, I've covered that. International missions focus. The missions focus that the movement had really centred around Barry Silverback. That was our missions focus, Papua New Guinea, and then from there, the nations that developed there. So now, it's become a worldwide initiative. And that's a very thrilling thing, because it's giving purpose to our movement. The expanded charter, I've gone through that, and you can read that yourselves. One of the major initiatives that we have done, which I think has helped transition the movement to become a properly functioning denominational family, is our credentialing process. Because the way the ministers are recognised. So when I was given a ministry credential, to be a pastor, this is how it happened. I go to the family centre, and things are doing well. Someone on the state exec goes, Bill's doing okay down there. I think we ought to give him a credential. Let's get him in. So I came in, talked, how you doing? I said, good. We hear good things. How's your marriage? Oh, all right. It really wasn't. It wasn't going too good at all. Oh, all right, and that was about it. And we had coffee, share. They gave me a credential. They didn't know what my marriage was like. They didn't know what my theology was. They had no. It just was hit and miss. And that's why a lot of men and women crashed and burned.
You got harder than me. I just got sent to me.
So the competency-based regime I think, was a stroke of genius that we've done. And the author of that was actually Grant Redman. Some of you don't realise he was the pastor of our Stirling church, and he went and pioneered in Sydney. But Grant wrote me a long letter. When I sent that survey out in 2002 or something, or 3, he wrote back and said, "Have you considered this?" And I said, "I don't know, what are you talking about? We just believe in the survival of the fittest. Darwinianism, like you sink or swim, you're called of God and you got Jesus, that's all you need." So I was miles away. But basically, he argued the case well, and we as an exec kind of reflected on it. And so now there's a competency-based regime, so that somebody, let's say this young man, I'm not being prophetic, let's say you want to go into ministry, then you fill in an application form, you get 3 or 4 referees, it goes to our state credentialing team, and they say, okay, and then you start a competency trained program. So Mike or Neil or someone will put you through it. There's about 30 competencies. It might take 2 years. If somebody's an experienced leader, it might take a lot less time. And so it's to do with theology, knowledge of Scripture, leadership skills, ministry skills, character, the personal issues that we raise. So then that becomes the trainee minister. Then from that, the state minister is another 30 competencies and have a coach. Then the national minister is another 30 competencies. So we kind of think, if doctors are not allowed to touch people after 6 years, we reckon it should be a few years of training before we let people loose. And so, even though it may take a shorter time for some people, like for example Janet Bryce, who was a foundation member of the Christian Family Centre, she was my assistant, she worked on the national exec, she came straight into a state minister's credential. She bypassed the trainee because she was so experienced, but she had to be competent in all those areas. And so it's not meant to be long, so hers might have taken about 1.5 years rather than, but it is a means by which we can really get to know the men and women who are being credentialed, and to make sure that they're sound and really well. And so we have in our in our questioning in the application form, it's fairly intrusive, the questions that we ask. And we have questions there on mental health, because a lot of people struggle with their health, and we need to know that. There's a horror story where there was a person who was brought forward to be credentialed, and they were mentally ill, but they were in remission from that illness, but it wasn't brought up. I was the state chairman then, and it wasn't mentioned on in any form. There was no form. Well, this person crashed badly after being ordained, really badly, had to be hospitalised. And we're thinking, man, we need to know, because, the best thing may have been that person to be an associate pastor, but to put him in a leadership role with all the pressures, it just wasn't smart. And that's why we try and be careful on mental health, on making sure that the morality of people, their ethics and all that stuff. So that's something that has helped strengthen the movement. So the quality of minister now, I think, is very high in those areas. It doesn't replace the call of God and the gifting of God, and that's something that's really important. So that's one that has been a significant thing. We have policies and operational guidelines galore. They're about this thick. We have today at the APMF, Australian Pentecostal Ministers Fellowship, we had 2 consultants come in on how the heck can local churches handle the governance responsibilities, what the government is placing, federal government, state government, local government. There was one church that had 200 policies, one large organisation, 200 policies. And you need staff. It's really difficult. And for example, the schools are even worse than churches. The levels of policies so government is really intrusive, and so that's why the movement now. So we have policies and guidelines to help our pastors and our churches, but it's a really difficult. For example, starting a church from scratch. So we've started Prospect, but all the governance things handled in the central office at the Seaton campus. So they're flying. They just have to preach and pastor and care, have to worry about all the other stuff. And so I just don't know someone starting a church on their own without connection to another church, a mother church with a strong umbilical cord, how that would work, because life is complicated today. And it's you just take a duty of care with kids. You take work, health and safety. These are really huge issues. Then you've got grievance policies. You've got there's a whole pile of stuff that. So we're talking today 2 pastors that have been taken, not to the cleaners, but allegations made against them, grievances over nothing issues. Over nothing issues. So someone exercising leadership, like I'm correcting you for, I don't know, you did something and I corrected you. Well, he cries he's been bullied, so he wants money from the church. And the tribunals will only listen to him, and it costs you thousands of dollars. That's a different kind of ball game to the 70s and 80s. And so this is happening across our Pentecostal movements. So therefore, governance and policies and guidelines, you've got to be really clear, and that's becoming onerous. And as a movement, we're endeavouring to grapple with that and to help all our churches on that one, particularly the smaller churches that struggle with it. So that's just part of denominational life. Questions, because it's 9 o'clock. Anything that you want me to elaborate on? Did I give out this one? Yes. This one here. Yep. This one here, we also put together an international directions where we say to all the nations where the CRC is in, to say, we in Australia cannot impose what their strategic direction will be. We can only say, look, let's help you come up with a template, you actually fill it in, whether because, you know, the needs in Papua New Guinea are different to, say, Nepal or Tanzania or New Zealand, etc. So the movement across the world is also following this to say, okay, we need to look at, you know, targets of church planting and ministers and stuff like that. So that's another document that we do that every 5 years as well. So this brightly coloured thing, and you'll see there's a message from Barry Silverbank, Phil Kaiser, myself, and then we basically ask all of our various nations to have input, and then we put this together, but it's now for them to actually flesh it out. So we've got a strategic plan on the international level. How well it goes, that's the question, because some nations really struggle. For example, I go to the National Executive Council of Papua New Guinea when they have their meeting. I usually have a day with them. We talk about strategy, and it's a different ball game. They just don't know. Somebody will get saved, and they'll go and plant a church the next week. He's got 50 people, but he knows nothing. He just knows Jesus as his saviour. So, and then that church might close. There might be some. So every nation is different in how it operates culturally, and the unique issues they have. Like, you know, in Papua New Guinea, I did some lectures on domestic violence and sexual abuse. Do you know that 2 out of 3 women in Papua New Guinea either get sexually abused or beaten? That's 66%. That's the United Nations research, and we met the United Nations lady who's actually, it's horrendous what's taking place there. And that's not, and in Africa, it can be as bad. And so there are unique issues, social, moral, ethical issues that these nations have to face. I mean, Australia's bad too. We have one woman killed basically a week by her partner. So domestic. So we think 1 in 5 women in Australia get sexually abused in their lifetime. 1 in 7 men. 3 of my pastors, Christian Family Centre pastors, were sexually abused as little boys. Men are starting to talk about it now, but they'll start talking about it in their 60s and 70s, whereas women talk about it when they're in their 20s and 30s. So these are issues that somehow, you know, getting the data is really important. The rise in occult practices in Australia. Do you realise that occultism is increasing? White magic, witchcraft, all that kind of stuff. So therefore, every country is different. So your strategic direction has to be targeted to try and meet those needs. And so that's why every nation has to do its thing under the guidance of what we provide. So that's a little about the CRC. Read the material. Read Leo's book. Well, it's not his book. We've put it together. His books, and I think that'll be helpful. And also, Flames of Revival, Dudley Cooper's. It's a very thrilling read. Actually, you get very excited and think, "Oh God, just keep doing this stuff for us." Well, thank you for being a good audience. Sorry that I'm being a bit crook, but I think we've covered a fair bit. Let me pray for you. Father, thank you for people who are keen to learn and grow and become more Christ-like and want to be empowered to want to serve you more effectively in their local church. Bless them. May some of the things that I've covered resonate and help them in their journey of understanding their church, understanding their denominational family. Bless them now. In Jesus' name, amen. God bless you guys.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Bill. Grab some books, grab some material. If you want extra copies of that stuff, go for it. Now, our next gathering is Saturday morning, the 27th of June, okay? Saturday morning, the 27th of June. So just to make sure you got that noted in your calendar so you don't miss that. And that'll be here at Sturt Street. Pastor Mike will be sharing, and then I'll be starting a series. So Saturday morning, 27th. Other than that, tables down the back with some books. Thank you guys for your help, and God bless you. Have a great evening.